It is so great to be with you all tonight. I've been looking forward to this for some time, been praying about this, and it's just great to be with you all. Thank you for having me and letting me be here and to share some thoughts with you all. And yes, I'm an attorney. This is the part where I usually apologize. But I'll tell you what, I've got a bunch of them, and I'm not going to share them all with you, but I've got a bunch of attorney jokes just like you probably do. Now, I think I've heard almost all of them. So if you think you know an attorney joke that I haven't heard of, don't give me the usual ones. If you've got a good attorney joke that you think maybe I haven't heard before, I would love to hear it so I can add it to my resume of attorney jokes, because we make for some pretty good joke material. And so I'd love to hear that if you've got that. But I'll bet the chances are I've heard most of them. The one that I think maybe I like the most is it's when in any joke or story, when someone goes to heaven, it's Peter at the pearly gates. I don't know why Peter is assigned that job and why Paul or one of the other apostles couldn't do that, but it's always Peter at the gates. And so there's this man and this woman who go to heaven, and when they get there, they go up to Peter and they say, "Hey, we were wanting to know, we were really good friends on earth, but never got married, and we really think we'd like to get married in heaven." And Peter says, "Well, we don't do that in heaven." He goes, I know, but this would just mean the world to us. We just think we missed out on that experience in life, and we would just really like to be married." And so Peter says, "Okay," and he goes back, and about a year later, comes back and says, "Okay." And he brings out a preacher, and the preacher gives them the vows, and they take their vows, and they're married. And then a year later, they come back and they say, "Peter, we're really sorry. We changed our mind. It's not working out, and we don't want to be married anymore. Is there some way that we could get a divorce?" And Peter said, "You've got to be kidding me." And they said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, it took me a year to find a preacher up here. How long do you think it's going to take me to find an attorney in heaven?" So that's a good, preacher/attorney joke. But it really is great to be with you. But yes, let's see if this thing's working. There we go. Okay, so here's the first thing I need to tell you about. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about me, but this is what I do for a living. I wear a lot of suits, and I wear a lot of ties. That's what attorneys do. That's a good part of my wardrobe. And as an attorney, I will find myself from time to time running in circles that I might not otherwise if it weren't for the fact that I'm an attorney. And so I get to meet some very unique and interesting people from time to time. Like occasionally, I get to meet famous broadcasters or famous coaches. Sometimes famous former presidents or famous athletes. Occasionally. Sometimes you get to rub shoulders with the royal family. And that's something that happens occasionally when you're an attorney. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, that's not fair. Why does Kevin get to meet all those famous people and not me? That doesn't seem fair or right, does it? And you know what? I would tend to agree with you that if that was actually me in those photos, yeah, that might not be fair. But here's the thing. We like for things, generally speaking, to be fair and even and equal, or sometimes use the term equitable or just, or to have a sense of justice. We like that. That seems like the right thing to do. We want to be fair and just, and that's the way we like it. And I get that. And so that's what I want to talk about tonight, is this sense of justice that is so popular today. So let's talk about social justice, because you hear that term a lot. Social justice. Probably heard that term more in the last decade than you probably ever have in the rest of your life, whether you're young or old. Social justice. But I want to talk about it in the context of the Bible. And we'll talk a little bit more why that's so important to come from that perspective. So let's talk about this. First of all, let's make sure we're using the same language here. And by the way, in talking about this, if at some point you have a question that you need answered, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll be glad to stop and we can talk about that. If you've got some thoughts that you'd like to add to what we're talking about, maybe that would be better for you and I to talk afterwards, but I definitely, if you've got questions, I want to make sure they get answered. And we'll have some Q&A at the end, and I'll just open that up, and maybe there's some, maybe there's none, but I'll open that up if you want to ask some questions then. But at any time, you are welcome. I know it may seem a little strange in this environment, and maybe that's not the way we do things, but if you want to ask a question, I want to make sure that we continue to be on the same page. And I want us to be on the same page from the get-go when we talk about what is justice. And the reason why it's so important is because there's a lot of different ideas out there as to what justice is. There's a lot of different definitions out there. You hear some people talking about social justice, and usually they're coming at it from the perspective of, well, here's something that I don't like. And so to fix that and remedy it in the way that I think it should be fixed or remedied, that's social justice. Now, the problem is that someone who believes just the opposite of that person says, no, I think it should be remedied this way, and I think that is social justice. Okay, well, those are two very different ideas, and how are we going to figure out who's right and what is just, what is fair, what is equitable, what is justice in that situation with all these ideas floating around out there? Now, the answer to that problem might be in my watch. So let me ask you a question. Is this a good watch? Now, there's a lot of ways to answer that question. You might say, well, does it keep good time? Okay, that's one way to figure out if it's a good watch. Some people think a watch is a good watch if it's heavy. If it weighs a lot, it must be a well-made, good watch, right? Or does it have the word Swiss on it somewhere? That's a good watch, right? Or maybe it's that it looks really nice and it's shiny and it's pretty, and that's a good watch for some people. Or someone may say, well, can I talk to people on it? And that's how I determine what a good watch is. Okay, well, here's a different way to determine if it's a good watch. Here's how I define it. And I'm going to need some help. Josh, would you be so kind as to come up here and help me with this? I need some help. What Josh and I are going to do is we're going to determine if this is a good watch, because I think a good watch is a watch that can hammer a nail into a 2x4. That's how I define a good watch. So here's what I need you to do. If you would you stay right there, and here is a 2x4. And with that 2x4, we've also got a nail. I found this real small one in the garage. And so we're going to put this over here, and here's that. And I've got a little preset, got a little hole to get us started. And what I need you to do is just, you hold that end down here. And what I'm going to do, now I've got some safety goggles here. Do you need those?
I'm going to risk it.
Okay, all right. All right. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is, I've got this baseball bat here, and I'm going to put this watch on the baseball bat. and I'm going to hammer that nail. And if I can hammer that nail with this watch, then this is a good watch. So, are you ready? Okay. All right, let's give this a try. All right, so you might want to look away just a little bit. Okay, so let me move this, and let's get to hammering. Okay, you ready? All right. Oh! Yeah. Okay, that's not what I had planned on. And that's not working anymore. Okay. All right, our experiment is now over. Okay. All right, thank you for your help with that, but I appreciate you holding that for me. And that watch. Okay, well, all right, thank you. I appreciate that, Josh. I appreciate that. And so I think it's fair to say this is not a good watch. But that's not fair to say that, right? And the reason why is because we don't know if this is a good watch or not unless we come to an understanding and an agreement as to what it was made for. And if I come eventually to the right conclusion that watches are made for keeping time, then whether or not it can hammer a nail into a piece of wood has no bearing on whether or not it's a good watch. And so before I can determine if this is a good watch, there's an important question. What is it made for? And the same thing applies to us where we're defining something like justice. Before we can answer the question of what justice is, before we can come to a good conclusion and understanding and definition, we need to ask the question, why am I here? What's my purpose? What am I made for? Because I can't understand concepts like justice and fairness and equity and what's right and wrong until I first answer the question, what is my purpose? What am I made for? And the reason why is because if we don't understand that, then we're going to come to some very different conclusions about, for instance, what justice is. For example, if I think that I just came here and I'm the result of an explosion of chemicals that took place billions and billions of years ago, and that I'm just floating around the universe and I happened to land here and I evolved and I came into being, and therefore I am who I am because of chance, random circumstances, and there is no great purpose for me other than what I want to do for myself and what makes me feel good and what makes me happy. If that's my understanding, I'm going to come to a very, very different definition of what justice is as opposed to somebody who, for instance, thinks, I'm made in the image of God. And I was created by Him and for Him and for service and good works and to love God and to love my fellow man. And somebody who has the definition of justice in their mind and they come at it from the perspective of, I'm just here because of an explosion, they're going to have a very self-focused definition and understanding of what justice is. In other words, what makes my life better? Or what agrees with my agenda? It's going to be very person-centered or group-centered or agenda-centered in terms of how I define justice. In other words, this is the result I want. I like X over here, and so whatever gets me X. And so therefore, social justice is whatever circumstances in life get me what I want and what I like. Whereas a child of God doesn't have a self-centered perspective on justice. They have a selfless perspective that focuses on God and focuses on His Word. And so that's why we're going to be spending time talking about what the Bible talks about, because that has to be the perspective that we come from. So we want a biblical definition of justice. Or otherwise, I'm just making up the rules of what is social justice based upon what I like and what fits me and my agenda and my group and my friends. So let's talk about what the Bible says. Let's talk about a biblical definition of justice. Here's the first thing. It's about helping the helpless. When you read most verses, if you just do a concordance search of the word justice in the Bible, what you'll find is that most of the verses in the Bible that talk about this concept talk about the idea of helping the helpless, and primarily widows and orphans and the poor. Those are the primary objects of what the Bible talks about as justice. And here's just a couple of examples. Psalm 146, verse 7 says, "Who executes justice for the oppressed? Who gives food to the hungry? The Lord who sets the prisoner free." Or Isaiah 1, verse 17, that says, "Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause." The weakest citizens of our community need someone to be a voice for them, to represent them, to stand up for them. And when we do that, we are bringing a little bit of justice to their unjust, unfair world. I had a grandmother who passed away years ago. And surprise, surprise, I loved her dearly. But for all of my life when I knew her, she was a widow. Her husband passed away before I was born. And I never knew my mom's father. I only knew my mom's mom. I called her grandmother. And there was a preacher at her congregation. His name was Robert Dodson. And whenever I would see my grandmother, she loved Brother Robert. And she would talk about him. And every time I would see Robert, I knew him from the Brown Trail School of Preaching, but every time I would see him, I would usually see him more recently on an annual basis at the Lancaster Leaders Convention. And he was there, and every year when I would see him, I didn't introduce myself because that wasn't that important. I would just remind him, I'm June Frank's grandson. And I'd see the light bulb go off, and he knew who I was, and he knew who my grandmother was. And I would tell him this every year. I said, my grandmother really loved and appreciated you. She appreciated the fact that you were a preacher, that you were a sound preacher, that you taught the word to her. She appreciated her friendship with you. She appreciated the time that you spent visiting with her and talking with her and letting her know that someone cared about her as a grandson. It meant so much to me. I would hate to think that my grandmother was just lonely all the time and she didn't have anyone and she lived on her own. It meant so much to me to know that this preacher, who was busy and who had a lot of things to do, would take the time to make my grandmother feel special. This sweet Christian widow woman. And by just spending a little bit of time with her, he was bringing some justice to her life. He was being a friend to and helping people who were helpless and needed help in a very small but important way. Helping the helpless. Another way, part of the biblical definition of justice is radical generosity. And by radical, I don't mean just a little. You know, there's three basic views of our money and our possessions. There is secular individualism. And that's the idea of it's my money, it's my things, and it belongs to me. End of story. Then there's socialism. And that's the idea that my money and my possessions belong to the state and everyone. And then there's the Christian perspective, and that is everything I have, it belongs to God. I don't really have it. But I'm just a steward. I've just been entrusted with these things. And when we have that kind of mindset, that what I have is really God's and not mine, then we can have the kind of generous mindset that will allow us to bring justice to other people. For example, in 1 Timothy 6, verses 17 through 18, Paul talked about this concept. He says, "As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty or proud or arrogant, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good and be rich or generous, in good works to be generous and ready to share." Ready to share. In other words, ready to share with those who don't have. There was this little girl who was poor. And she was so poor that she couldn't afford warm clothes when it was cold outside. And the janitor of the school noticed that when it got cold outside, that she wore the same thin sweater every day. And so one day the janitor approached the girl after school, handed her an envelope with a $100 bill inside, and he says, "That's for you to buy a coat that will keep you warm." And her immediate response, having never seen a $100 bill in her lifetime, was to say, "How generous." And the janitor's response was, "Well, it's not my money to begin with." He had the mindset of not the socialist, not the secularist, but the Christian who believes what I have, I don't really have. It's God's to begin with, and I've just been entrusted with it. And therefore, when I have that mindset, it's going to be a whole lot easier if I can wrap my mind and my brain and my attitude and mentality around that truth. It's going to be a whole lot easier to be generous and help people and bring a little bit of justice to their lives. Radical generosity. Biblical definition of justice also includes the concept of universal equality. In other words, I'm not going to treat one person one way because I'm going to get some benefits from that relationship. But you don't have anything really to offer me over here, and so I don't really see us having much of a future as friends. And I'm going to treat you differently based upon what you have and what you can give me and what I like and what I don't like about people or individuals. I'm going to treat everyone equally. Deuteronomy 16, verse 19. Talks about this concept. It says, "You shall not pervert justice. You shall not show partiality. And you shall not accept a bribe." This idea of justice means I'm not going to accept a bribe and do a favor for someone because they have money that I wouldn't do for someone else. I'm not going to show partiality. I'm not going to have favorites. I'm going to do my very best to treat everyone the same. Or Acts 10. Verse 34, "So Peter opened his mouth and said, 'Truly I understand that God shows no partiality.'" When Peter brings the gospel for the first Gentile who's about to become a Christian, he says, now I get it. God doesn't show partiality. And if God doesn't show partiality, if God doesn't have favorites, then neither should I. Now, I have to admit, in reality, I don't subscribe to this theory. I don't believe in equality. I don't believe that I should treat people equally, regardless of money or status or popularity or skin color or gender. I mean, it's me after all. I mean, I should have to treat other people as equals. And in fact, the answer to that question is no, I should not. And the reason why is because of what Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. "But in humility, treat others better than yourself." Equal isn't even really good enough. You know, it's going to be really easy for me to get rid of all kinds of prejudices and dislikes that I have against other people for whatever reason. And we've figured out lots of ways to segregate and divide. We're really good at that. We've been doing it since the beginning of time. But you know what? If I have that humble servant mindset of I'm going to treat people as if they're better than me, I'm going to put myself in that position that Jesus talked about where I'm going to put myself last. And I'm going to put others first. And I'm going to be that servant. And that minister mindset that Jesus talked about, if I can start thinking that way, then I will have no problem being impartial and fair and just in bringing justice to other people. Because when I see other people, I'm going to presume and think that this person, in humility, in genuine humility, is better than me. I'm not better than anybody else. And I'm not even going to treat people like they're on the same level as me. I'm going to treat you as if you are the most important person in the world, and you're so important to me, and you're so important to God. We got to think like that. And that could have a huge, huge impact on us, on the church, and on the world. Now, this is important. This is a perspective thing. Doing justice is about helping others. It is not about helping me. It's not something I demand for myself. That's not how justice, biblical justice, works. And I know a lot of people are standing around and they don't like something that's going on around them, and they say, I demand justice, I demand justice. That's a very popular thing to do these days. I don't know this, but I'm fairly sure it's not in the Bible, but I'm fairly confident of this. I can almost promise you, on Judgment Day, millions and billions of people will stand before the judgment seat of God, and not a single person on that day will say, I demand justice. Not one. I think there will be millions and billions of people who will stand before the judgment seat of God and cry out, have mercy on me, a sinner. But no one's going to say, I demand justice, because that's not really what we want. Because what does Paul say to the Romans? For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That's all of us. None of us want justice. We want God's grace. We want God's mercy. Until I get really ticked off and mad about something. And then I forget about that grace and mercy, and now it's all about justice right now. And oh, how easy it is for us to forget about the grace that flows from the cross and why Jesus had to die on that cross. Because of what I did. Because of what we've done. Justice is about serving others. It's not about me. It's not about doing something for me. Justice is about serving other people. Now, you hear this all the time. But what about me? Something bad happened to me, and I demand retribution. I want justice. What about me? You know, Jesus heard those words. Did you know that? You know, someone came to Jesus one time and in essence said, what about me? You remember that occasion? In Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 15, that came up. Someone in the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. That's him basically saying, but what about me? And Jesus replied, Man, First of all, that's never a good way to start a sentence. When Jesus says to this person, man, what comes next is probably not going to be what that person wants to hear. He says, man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Then he said to them, watch out, be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Now, this is a really interesting conversation. I want you to think about this. Are we going to be judged by God someday? Yeah. Did Jesus, 2,000 years ago, come to this earth to judge us? No. That's going to happen, but that's not why Jesus came. Jesus came to bring salvation. John 12, verse 47, if anyone hears my words but does not keep them, I do not judge that person, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. Now, is that person going to be judged one day? Yes. Is it now? Not yet. Jesus said, I came to save the world. There's going to be judgment, and there's no way around it, and you can't get past it. But Jesus didn't come to fix everything right now. Now, you're probably like me, and you're probably thinking, but wouldn't it be nice? You know, haven't there been times like you're watching some trial on TV, and some person says he did it, and someone else says someone else did it, or someone says, I meant to do that, and someone else says, no, it was just a mistake. And you get these different stories and this testimony, and it's important to figure out what's going on. Wouldn't it be nice if Jesus could just step in and say, I'm going to exact perfect justice because I know everything that happened, and I'm going to fix it right now. And every argument and every dispute and every lawsuit, we're just going to resolve all of that because I know, and I can bring perfect justice and fix every problem right now. Have you ever thought, wouldn't that be nice? And Jesus said, that's not why I came. He could do that. He could certainly do that. He certainly has the ability and the power, being the omniscient, all-knowing, all-powerful God that he is. He could certainly do that, but that's not why he came. He came to serve and to save. It's not about, God, this is what I want. That's not what justice is. Somebody wronged me, and now I want to make sure it gets fixed. It's about me seeing injustices in other people's lives, and it's about me serving them. It's not something I demand or even ask for myself. Justice, the biblical concept of justice, is an opportunity for me to serve other people, to be like Christ. I'm not here to fix all of your problems. I'm here to help you get to heaven. That's what Jesus is saying. That's the point he's trying to get across. This person is concerned about earthly injustice, and God is trying to prepare this person for eternal justice. This person's concerned about problems now, and he says, there's greater spiritual, more important things going on. Now, notice, Jesus doesn't say, you're wrong, your brother should get everything. He doesn't say that at all. It may very well have been the case that this person who brought this problem to Jesus was in fact entitled to the money that he's asking for. His brother may have been someone who was swindling him out of money that he was rightfully entitled to. But Jesus says there is something here that is so much more important. And that's losing your soul, being so concerned and wrapped up in physical, worldly possessions. That's what you should be concerned about, not whether or not your brother's getting some of your money. But what about me? It's not about me. Justice is about me serving other people. Now, why do we seek justice? What's the reason? For social justice, for any justice, why do we seek justice? I mean, is it just to make the world a better place? I mean, wouldn't that be nice if the world were a better place? Is that it? You know, think about this. What if I could? And this would be really nice. Think about all the awards you'd get. What if I could eliminate the problem of orphans? What if I could put every orphan in a home, a loving home? What if you could do that and you solve that problem for the world? Think they'd Time Man of the Year, Woman of the Year, maybe? Or what if I could solve the problem of unemployment and homelessness? I could get everyone a job and a home. Wouldn't that be nice? Or what if I could solve the problem of world hunger? Or racism? I mean, that sounds impossible, and it probably is, because we've had it since almost the beginning of time, since we've had races. But if I could eliminate that awful thing, well, wouldn't that be great to bring justice to the world in that way? Or what about violence and abuse, especially family violence? If I could somehow eliminate that, wouldn't that be great? But that's not why we seek justice. If I could do all of those things, and that's all I did in my lifetime, the world would say Kevin was one of the greatest people in the history of the world, who far eclipsed Gandhi. And on most top 10 lists of the greatest people in history, Gandhi's usually like 3 or 4 or 5 or something like that. If I could do all of those things, and I made the world a better place, what I haven't done is what Jesus was trying to do in his conversation with that young man. Yeah, I could solve all these problems, but what's more important is the problem of the spiritual condition of your soul. What's more important is heaven and hell and eternity that weighs in the balance. I could solve all those problems, I could fix all those things, and that'd be nice, but that's not why we do justice. We're not doing those things just so the world might be a better and more friendly and nicer place to live. That would be great. I'm all for those things. But that's not why we do justice. We do justice to save souls, to reach people, to help people get to heaven. That's the purpose. That's the motivation. Did Jesus bring about justice in his lifetime? Did he help the helpless? He feed people who needed to be fed? Did he heal people who were dying or dead? Did he bring justice to people? Yeah, he did it. He did a lot of it. He did a lot of amazing things. But what was Jesus here for? Why did he come? What was his purpose? Luke 19, verse 10. I came, here's my purpose, here's my reason. I came to seek and save the lost. That's my purpose. That's why I'm here. That's what's important. That's my passion. That's what drives me. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's why I'm bringing justice. It's not about just making the world a better place. It's about helping people. Paul understood this concept perfectly. First Corinthians 9, verses 19 through 22. Paul talked about this. Notice here the emphasis on doing good things to save people's souls. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them to save souls. To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law, save souls. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law, again, to save souls. To the weak, I became weak, that I might win the weak, save souls. I have become all things to all people. In other words, I have worked hard. I have done what I could. I have brought justice to people's lives. Why? That by all means I might save some. That's the purpose. Does it help other people in the circumstances they're in their life right now? Yes. And that's wonderful. But that's not why we do justice. We are trying to reach people and save souls. Because someday in eternity, they'll stand before the judgment seat of God, and whether they were rich or poor, black or white, whether they received justice in their lifetime or no justice in their lifetime, the only thing that's going to matter is, were you a child of God? And were you faithful to Him? Were you prepared for eternity? That's why we do justice. And maybe, hopefully, you see here, the goal of justice is to cause other people to focus on God, to turn to, be receptive to listen to God, and ultimately be saved by God. That's the goal. So maybe you think to yourself, okay, it's time for change. I'm ready to go out and do something. I'm ready to, let's sign a petition. Let's go take it to the streets and let's protest. And let's let those fat cats up on the hill know that we're here and that there's things that, and lots of people do those kinds of things, and they protest and do that, and that's fine if you want to do that. But let me remind you of one thing. You never see the children of God doing that in the Bible. You never see the Israelites protesting and saying, we demand equal wages if we're going to build these pyramids. You just don't see that. For many of us, we think to ourselves, maybe you think this way. There's a person in the Bible, and he suffered a lot of things. And in that suffering, he was taken from his homeland. He was kidnapped. He was sexually assaulted. He was discriminated at in his work. He was lied and discriminated against by his friends. He had all of his rights taken away. And that person was Joseph. And what did Joseph do? He patiently waited for God to use him. What he didn't say was, I demand justice. Because he knew justice is not about me. Justice is about how God can use me to help other people. And he eventually did, didn't he? If you think about Joseph's life, that whole first chapter of the story is all about all of the injustices that Joseph endured. And yet God had plans for him. Here's what we're really about. It's about 1 million different people doing 1 million little things. That's what justice is. We like to think, I'm going to have my great Spartacus moment, and I'm going to stand up, and I'm going to stand in front of the government, I'm going to stand in front of the world, and I'm going to take a stand and draw a line in the sand and say, no more, here I am, I'm standing up for God, and everyone's going to see me and hear me, I'm going to have this great impact, and it's going to be amazing. That is not most people, even in the Bible. The great impact that Christians and the children of God have, and the great impact we can have in bringing justice to others, is not me standing up and saying, here I am doing something great and wonderful for God. It's about 1 million different people doing 1 million little things that has an enormous impact on the world. I mean, think about Dorcas, Acts 9, verse 36. She made clothes for poor people. You've got feeding of others that just started out with one boy in John 6 who just brought, here's some bread and fish, and that's all I've got, not much. You've got the widow who gave her 2 pennies in Luke 21 that had a tremendous impact. The deacons who are helping the widows in Acts chapter 6. the Christians in Acts 2:45 who sold their possessions for other Christians. Acts 8 verse 4, Christians when they were persecuted, they went everywhere preaching the word. It wasn't great moments, although there's a few of them in the Bible. You've got David standing there in front of Goliath, and it's an amazing moment. But what most people do in the Bible and what most people do today is just a lot of people doing a lot of small things that has an enormous impact that changes people and changes lives and changes this world. We can do so much if we'll just let God use us. Those kinds of little things, 1,000,000 times over by 1,000,000 people, have an amazing influence. That's social justice. When I have the mindset that I'm trying to help other people, and it's not about me. And that mindset we really have to have in everything we do. It's not about me when it comes to how I live my life, when it comes to my family, when it comes to my kids, when it comes to my wife, when it comes to my friends at work, when it comes to my neighbors, when it comes to my worship, when it comes to everything I do in life. If I can just get that mindset drilled into my head, Kevin, it's not about me. It's about God. It's about others. It's about opportunities to serve. That's the kind of social justice that can have a tremendous impact, and every single one of us can be a part of that because we're called by God to be like his son Jesus. And Jesus was about social justice. He was about serving other people to help them see the need they had in their life to be saved. It's about salvation. And ultimately, like all truths in the Bible, it all goes back to the cross. Jesus is trying to get these people's attention. He's trying to help them, to get them to realize the greatest need they have is going to come when he dies on a cross. And that will prepare you for eternity. That's the kind of justice we need. All right, I've been talking way too long, and no hands have gone up. If you have any questions at all, if you want to, okay, thank you. All right, yes, so please speak up. I'll probably repeat your question so we can all hear it, but yes. Sure. And
you have the right to speak up for yourself.
How those situations get sort of revealed, how people get to know about it, how those who can do something about it get that information. Yeah, it may come from a squeaky wheel. It may just come from, it could have just come from someone who just observed that situation and said, hey, we've got a problem here. Now, I know that in the church, just like in many workplaces and things like that, it's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. And so sometimes we're sort of inclined to want to complain and get attention and get help. And yes, there's times when you may need to let people know, and you should, when people in the church have a need. Now, there's a fine line between saying, I have a need and I need some help, and complaining about it and self-servingly demanding justice. That may be a very fine line sometimes. And so we have to be careful with that. But yes, follow up.
Like my second thought was, like whenever I was being
I get that, and so let me follow that up with what I think is probably the universal illustration. How many people here like Chicago-style pizza? Okay, that's like the pizza pie. That's deep dish. There's a lot of stuff in there. I'm a huge fan. Huge fan. I don't like the thin Ritz cracker stuff. I don't get it. But some people do. And there's this place in where I live in Katy called Star Pizza, and they have this Chicago-style pizza, and they've got this supreme pizza that has everything on it, and it is great, except for the green peppers. They're just way too strong. It kind of ruins everything else. And so whenever I go there, I always order. It's called the Starburst Pizza. And I'm not getting free advertising for this, but they're getting it anyway. And I order this, but always hold the green peppers. And let's say that the waiter comes out and he brings that pizza and it's got green peppers on it. There is no excuse. When I specifically, expressly, explicitly told you no green peppers. I even made sure that we made eye contact when I gave you that directive. And here I am with this pizza, and so now I'm going to let that waiter have it. And I'm going to let the rest of the restaurant know how upset I am and offended I am. And you brought this pizza out. I told you no green peppers. You brought out green peppers. I want to talk to your manager. I want a discount. I want to eat for free tonight. I don't want you to ever bring me green peppers again. I'm going to write the worst Yelp review you've ever seen in your life, and I can go on and on. Or when that waiter suddenly realizes I brought you a pizza with green peppers on it and I made a mistake, I could take the perspective of and say something like, it's not that big of a deal. I know you're busy. You got a lot of things that you're trying to do as a waiter or waitress. I know this is a hard job. Don't worry about it. We've all made mistakes. God made green bell peppers for some reason, and maybe he made them because he wants me to eat some of them from time to time. I probably need more vegetables in my diet, assuming that nasty green pepper is a vegetable. Or maybe I should just tell him, you know what? I'm going to give thanks to God for this pizza and everything on it, including the green peppers. And let that person know that I believe in a God who believes in mercy. And it's not about me getting my way all the time and getting my pizza exactly the way I want it, although that is important. But here's an opportunity for me to let someone know it's okay to make mistakes. We need to be kind and gracious and merciful to one another. That's the perspective we need to have. I can be indignant. I can be self-centered. I can demand I get my way. Or I can be generous and kind and spiritually minded and Christ-like. Even with something as simple as how I order my pizza. And whatever you do, don't withhold a tip because something on your pizza wasn't supposed to be there. Those people work way too hard. But it's a mindset. And we can display Christ-likeness in every situation and circumstance in life. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much.